Benita, does this work? Does this work? No. It's for the. Okay. Well, I'm just going to stand up, if I may. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to LX and Cremades&Calvo-Sotelo. Nader Goebel is a Mexican law firm, and Ives Hayaux du Tillyl, I'm a Mexican lawyer, obviously with a French name. And I'm based in London. We're the only Mexican law firm to have a London office. And what we're doing in London is basically serving, providing legal services on Mexican law in Europe. Now, we were going to talk about cases, and curiously enough, I'm going to talk about the national anti-corruption system because there's a lack of cases on anti-corruption in Mexico. That doesn't mean that there's no corruption in Mexico. And, well, first of all, it is quite important because one of the main laws that was created to form the national anti-corruption system is a law that was created or passed because of a civil society movement. This was not done by our governors or deputies or representatives. It was basically imposed upon them by civil society through a new proceeding that was created under Mexican law that allows citizens, provided they obtain a number of support for an initiative, for this to be passed into Congress to be discussed. So this is a major development in Mexico because what we're seeing is civil society and citizens acting as responsible citizens, and the lack of trust on governments, which is not only particular to Mexico, it is something that is happening all over the world, as we can see, is allowing citizens to have this much more active role. So I think that's very important. Now, Mexico is one of the champions in Latin America free market economies. We started when we joined the GATT in 1991, which is currently the OMC, and then we entered into NAFTA in 1994 and joined OECD. We were the first Latin American member to join the OECD. I also worked at the OECD, by the way, and the Mexican delegation. I love the OECD, by the way. It's great. But what I was going with this is, having such a free market economy, why can we see that the trend in corruption just goes up, and our rankings go down in terms of this is 30 points out of 100. We're currently in 30, and we're growing in the charts. That is not good, obviously, and that is not good because I think what Mexico has forgotten to do is, you can free your market, but to the extent that you do not reinforce the rule of law, then it doesn't work. A free market economy requires both a free market, but also a strong rule of law and a strong administration of justice. And that is probably the most critical part that we need to work in Mexico. And obviously lawyers, we're in the forefront of that battle, and we're almost responsible to making sure that this works. So just to give you an idea, before this national anti-corruption system came into effect, corruption was only, punishment on corruption was only for individuals. So it was kind of a safe haven for anyone that wanted to be a corrupt company. Because your employees could be corrupt. If they found out, they would go to jail, and the company, will have no consequences whatsoever. There was only one exception, which was of bribery of Mexican companies abroad, because under the OECD convention, we had to implement that into our law. So it only applies abroad, but not in Mexico. So this is one of the major changes, and civil society actually opened this and created further liability to companies. And I think it is relevant for everyone in this audience because this poses a number of challenges nowadays for an M&A, including a Mexican company, because of the liabilities and the consequences it may have if the company is found out to have committed acts of corruption, directly or indirectly. So nowadays, you know, when your son asks you if he's considering a career in organized crime, you don't know if it's government or private sector, because corruption is a two-sided problem. I think we all have blamed this on governments, but obviously, if there's someone taking money, there's someone giving that money away. And so the first thing is to acknowledge that, you know, we cannot just put all the blame in governments, but I strongly disagree with our president that says that this is a cultural problem for Mexicans. I think that's completely absurd and idiotic. I think, you know, the problem is not cultural, the problem is legal, and the problem is a question of rule of law and impunity. So this whole system is going to work only if the rule of law is put into place. So this is kind of wishful thinking if we do not reinforce the rule of law. And obviously lawyers, again, we have a very strong and important role to play in that. And multinational companies working in Mexico also have a lot to do with this. This is quite recent, so it started through changes in 2015, and it just became effective this July 2017. So this is actually brand new. The idea of this mechanism is to have a coordination among all levels of government and also to give the civil society a role within this system to oversee what the government is doing and to maintain the government up to speed in what they're doing. There's changes to all these laws, so obviously when I went to law school, even when you went to law school, Emiliano, they didn't teach us this. So as lawyers, we continuously need to be learning new things. But the most important one is the law on responsibility, administrative responsibility, which is the law that was actually put into place by the civil society. It was called the Ley 3 de 3, but it's basically this law that provides liability for individuals and public officers. So I'm not going to go into detail. I hope they can circulate this, and if you're curious enough, but you know, there's various bodies that includes the participation of civil society, a coordination committee, and then a steering committee, which is a government-led one. And then you have the local anti-corruption systems. Mexico is a federal country. We have 32 states. So, you know, this is just in the federal level. On a state level, it's still going to take a lot of time to put into effect. Now, what's important here? We have conducts now are divided between serious and non-serious offenses, and private individuals are liable when their activities constitute serious offenses. Non-serious offenses are mostly related to day-to-day activities of public officials. So the law now describes what are the serious offenses, which include bribery, unlawful participation in administrative acts, peddling, use of false information, obstruction of investigations, collusion, misuse of public resources, unlawful hiring of former public officers, and it is quite important also that bribery now, it's clear that it's directly or indirectly. So it's more following the FCPA standards that it doesn't need to be directly, but it can also be through third parties. And the penalties are now imposed to the entities themselves, not only to the individuals. So companies who host representatives of people linked to them are involved will be liable for this. Penalties go to up to 100 million or double of the profits obtained, which is quite relevant, and also being banned to participate in federal procurement programs, which is also very important. A lot of companies involved in these are construction companies, companies that are linked to, obviously, to government contracts. And also, they can be suspended from activities of up to 3 years or be subject to an early dissolution. So this is quite relevant if you're in an M&A transaction acquiring a Mexican company, because if it ends up that there was something wrong, then you may end up having no company at the end. So due diligence on corruption-related issues becomes extremely relevant. We don't have all the the answer to all the questions right now, but this is the kind of things we need to do as lawyers. Now, with regard to the sanction, what is important is that there's leniency and there's some benefits for those companies that have codes of conduct or integrity policies into place. This is the other important things for you to take into account and know. We're currently working with a number of our clients to develop their own internal manuals, guidelines, proceedings, and code of conducts and policies, because to the extent that you can prove to the Mexican authorities that you actually were doing everything you could to prevent corruption, then obviously the sanctions will be reduced to a minimum. And there's also provisions regarding whistleblowing. So I'm not going to go piece by piece, you can read it yourselves, but there are some guidelines of what the integrity policy or code of conduct should contain. Clarify who's responsible for doing what, have an audit committee, reviews, have guidelines, involvement of the Human Resources Department, whistleblowing systems. Whistleblowers will also have some benefits, obviously, to help people come up. And just to give you an idea, in 2015, because as I said, there's no corruption in Mexico because apparently no one has been prosecuted nor in jail for corruption. So, I'm very jealous of our Brazilian friends because when people say, well, look at the mess in Brazil, the Lava Jato. But I think, it's really good because you're cleaning up the mess and then you have all the dust going up. And well, it will. So I'm very positive and I'm certain about that. But when I turn to my country and see that nothing is happening, you say, well, why is it not happening? No? In the US in 2015, there were 61 tips from non-US countries on FCPA, 13 from Mexico. And while the number of complaints from non-US origin complaints rose by 10% in 2016, those from Mexico rose 12 times, 123%. Now, with your current president in the US, he doesn't seem to have any interest in prosecuting corruption anywhere because he doesn't want to shoot himself on the foot. But that's going to be very bad for the world order. But obviously, China is probably going to be the one prosecuting corruption. That's a joke, obviously. So finally, I think just some final comments. I was excited about Odebrecht. I thought you were going to say something about it. But I said nothing has happened in Mexico. So there was the Walmart case, which was a relevant case in the US. No one was prosecuted in Mexico. The HSBC case, which was a very relevant case, HSBC had to enter into bargaining agreement with the authorities in the US. No one was prosecuted in Mexico. The ABB case, the Siemens case, there's all these cases, and mysteriously, when you arrive to Mexico, nothing really happened. So, we wonder what happened there. In Odebrecht, obviously, Mexico, Guatemala, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, República Dominicana, Venezuela, Brazil, and Argentina were involved. Over 788 million were given as bribes, and the benefits of the company were of 3.3 billion. This is tainting and is currently a big thing in Mexico nowadays. I think we have also in our Senate today the discussion because the prosecutor for crimes related to elections was fired mysteriously after having implied that the former CEO of Pemex received money for the campaign of our current president from Odebrecht. And apparently he likes samba, and he just met with him a couple of times to dance or drink caipirinhas, but no money was passed there. So we still do not know where those 10 million arrived in Mexico, but certainly we're going to find out. And again, civil society and lawyers, the bar associations are extremely involved trying to make sure that law is not ignored. Finally, just to finish, again, the problem in Mexico, corruption is just a symptom of a sickness, but the sickness is really the impunity we live in. And as a lawyer, I need to live in a rule of law country, because otherwise there's nothing I need to do. I become, if I cannot guarantee that my clients will have a fair trial or their property will be respected, we have a problem. In the two Mexicos we live in, because in the multinational world, I think we have a very safe rule of law system where contracts are enforced, arbitration works quite well, even trials among very large corporations. The main problem remains probably in the day-to-day justice. Justice for individuals that have no access to big firms or big lawyers, have no access to the legal system. So I think that is part of the challenge we need to overcome. And obviously, if you have any transaction in Mexico, be very careful about the implications of the national anti-corruption system for your clients and obviously for the target companies you might be looking at. Thank you very much again for the invitation.